Uh, okay, so I think we can start discussing some of the latest news topics. I think we're in a really bizarre situation where basically all of the major institutions of the world shifted overnight because of an undercurrent that the Catholic Church has tapped into. So I think the news flow will make sense if you interpret it from that on that basis, right? So the news flow will make a lot of sense if you give yourself some time to analyze it based on very recent events. So let me get started. And our coverage has shifted, and we're providing the ability for folks to um, also get market news, and that's important because a lot of what's happening in the world will reverberate, as many of you know, on an economic level. So, for instance, right now, one of the main patterns is Trump says something weird, or really the U.S. government through Trump, or Trump commands the U.S. government to do something out of the norm, whether it's bombing Iran or kidnapping the sitting president of Venezuela, an unpopular guy, but nonetheless um, very much legal. That being said, he'll do something that's very irregular and it reverberates through the market. And so that is one of the reasons why we're covering now a small subset of what we think is an important binational dynamic or binational stocks, binational capital, which is really multinational. But at this point, we're trying to ground some of this between the Mexico and U.S. experience. So our news site is going to reflect a lot of this streaming news in real time, and there's going to be a few stocks that are going to be very relevant, which you're seeing here. So as you can see, there's a ticker on the top of the platform that shows the current news flow, and you can use that as not only a way to get recent news from other sources, not just us, but also to get some of these important issues we're highlighting. So we're going to focus a lot on economic news, social media, and like social events. You know it when you see it, kind of like Supreme Court ruling on obscenity, and obviously AI and political news will stream on that ticker. But for now, those are the main topics to look through. Either it's a source, or like here, like Reuters, or it's a topic. So just something that I want to share with you all as we start, really engaging more of this content for the reasons that I mentioned. It's just difficult to um, it's just difficult to cover it all by ourselves. So we're gonna lean into sourcing other people and citing them, of course, and then letting you be the judge as far as what kind of news and information you're consuming. So that's a little bit of an update on the ticker on the top. Um, a lot of irregular things happening in the market. It's like it's a free for all in terms of trying to grab a portion of the government and making a run for it, right? So definitely something to watch out for. Um, yeah, so we're gonna let a few more minutes pass, but I think it's very important that we all get a sense of what's happening in the markets because you kind of explain a lot of things that way, right? You'll explain a lot of things if you understand that there's a market dynamic, that people are trading on stuff, that people are really trying to make as much money as they can, while Trump raises the ante, ups the ante in the Middle East, right? So, for example, one of the most egregious things that I noticed this week from this guy was the casual threat to Oman, because basically Oman and if you don't know, Oman and Iran share uh, two sides of the Strait of Hormuz. So they share this region. In effect, they basically are able to um, control the strait theoretically. But for a long, long time, this was considered international waters. It was um, the free flow of commerce was sort of like a peace offering that all nations engaged in, right? Because otherwise, we're gonna have massive fees hit every single aspect of commerce, and it creates tension and inflation, essentially, price inflation of some sort. But as so there was a lot of internal communication in Iran and also international coverage from Al Jazeera, where Iran was essentially saying that they wanted to share control of the Strait of Hormuz with Oman. And that was interesting because they would effectively be bolstering the position of a neighbor who was formerly hostile. But now, because of all of the reversal of benefits in terms of the U.S. presence in the Middle East, they are not as happy with the American presence in the area. So that tells any individual who's mindful of this development in the Middle East that hey, we're not really the reliable partner that so many people are looking for in terms of um, being able to lean on the United States for uh, protection and for some type of regional stability. So we'll go back to what it was that actually drove this news item, this threat from Iran, from President Donald Trump to Iran, actually. So when he was in a White House cabinet meeting, which was supposed to take place in Camp David, to kind of give you like this sense that there's a lot of military activity and so on. When he did all of that, there was an issue where they couldn't get to the Camp David facility because of the rain, because it rained all Memorial Day weekend. So they didn't have this grandiose setting that has traditionally enabled presidents to make military-related announcements. So they just did it from the White House, and it was a little bit anticlimactic because I imagine they wanted to either be more forceful in some announcements or more definitive, and the Iranians just keep declining to really make a clear capitulation towards any U.S. demands, and in fact, they raise theirs as a sort of a way to continue engaging them on their terms, and engaging them being the U.S. government. So as we start realizing that the Iranian government is not going to just capitulate, the U.S. gets more and more desperate and starts crafting narratives and getting really angsty with the general media. And it's interesting to see how much of the U.S. political policy has been about saving face. It always has been. It doesn't, surprise anyone who was familiar with U.S. foreign policy, but it does tell you that there's much to be desired in the domain of um, political bargaining in the world, right? Like we are a less secure nation now, thanks to this development, and um, the world is a little bit more chaotic thanks to the Trump administration's threats to Iran and now Oman. So one of the statements that President Trump made was Oman will behave just like everybody else, or we'll have to blow them up. And that comes in a time of a lot of U.S. piracy. So if you look at the blockade of the Iranians, because it was unprovoked and because a lot of this is taking place in international waters, it's kind of like it's kind of like an act of piracy. But then there's also the actual acts of piracy. For example, when they um, basically stole a oil tanker from the Iranian private sector or commerce. I'm not quite sure how commerce or the economy in Iran itself works. I don't know how much state intervention there is at that level, but I'm sure there's a lot. And there's actual acts of piracy on the part of the U.S. and what we're seeing there is an increase of that and an increase of that overall makes for a much more dangerous maritime environment. And mind you, if you're any nation that imports goods and services, you're going to want for a maritime environment that is safe, that is, you know, basically regulated and not subject to the whims of any one of these individuals, and lets you know that, hey, whatever things I expect from overseas, they're going to get here correctly. Now, there's an embargo on Cuba, and then there's also the maritime interdiction that the U.S. is engaging in from from Cuba towards the rest of the Caribbean. So you have another act of murder on part of U.S. naval forces in the Caribbean under the premise of drug trafficking, and you have these like fishermen boats getting shot off at every moment. And so today, May 29th, Friday, May 29th, we're seeing this constant interdiction and this constant issue with the safe passage in international waters. And it's interesting because just as he's making these announcements, um, we're getting explosions for United Kingdom linked vessels. So this is wreaking havoc all across not just the Middle East, but also Europe. And it will eventually percolate towards other parts of the world and the region, and you're just going to have massive inflation because people need to make up for the price in imports. Um, and of course, you know, we're seeing the latest news from the AP, and Trump is still wondering whether he's going to actually provide us with some clarity with regards to Iran. There is no deal at this moment. There is no freaking deal, and these people are still talking about the possibility that maybe they're going to win the war on their own terms. But you know, the Iranians don't have to budge. With the Strait of Hormuz being under lockdown, there's really nothing that the U.S. can offer them, and it's very likely that over time the inflationary pressures on the U.S. will be greater than the military pressures that the U.S. can exert over Iran because they're spent. They're spending 500 million a day. How much more debt can you create at this point before you bankrupt further the nation? And there's like a no. I mean, there's no good way of ending this war without the U.S. spending a ton of money to extricate themselves without losing face, right? And I think that's one of the issues that we're all going to have to contend with as Trump refuses to withdraw for a lot of reasons. I mean, there's the possibility that if they withdraw, then there will be a lot of havoc on oil markets because there will be a shift in currency usage, at least in the Strait of Hormuz. So imagine we're going from the petrodollar, U.S. Currency being backed by oil transactions significantly in the Middle East to something else. And whatever that else is just going to be significant for whoever the beneficiaries are. Um, but so I definitely see this devolving further before it gets better, and that means $5 gas for anyone who cares about that. Moving on, I do have something to show the group, which is the matter composite. It's this editorial um, weighted index that we've defined here at La Cartita, which involves the top 10 Mexican American depository receipts. basically Mexican-based companies. That means their GMP moves mostly to Mexico, um, and they are headquartered somehow in Mexico. These are Mexican companies who are also traded in the New York Stock Exchange, which is a fairly common thing for international companies to have an American depository receipt for regulatory purposes. And I mean, they have to be so that Americans can buy these stocks without having to, you know, adopt a residency in a foreign country. They can buy them here in the U.S. and have that market exposure to different markets, whether they be European, emerging, G10, like whatever dimension you're looking for, you can get an ADR. And we focus on the top 10 based on CapEx. Like these people actually spend money on people, places, and things, as opposed to just GPU. And it's a nice breath of air, fresh breath of air to take a look into this index and just see companies that actually produce things. So on the top of the list is American Mobile. It's a network. It's a cell phone. It's a cellular network, telecommunications provider. So it's got that intersection of services and telecommunications, and they are exchanged in the NYSE, or New York Stock Exchange. There's FEMSA, which is like a conglomerate. A lot of people know it for selling furniture and retail goods. There's also Walmart, which has a division called Walmex in Mexico. And this entity um, is the biggest retailer, I think, in all of Latin America, if if not just Mexico. So definitely a way to get exposure to the Mexican markets in American denominated currency. And if you go through this list, you'll find people you'll recognize: Coca-Cola, FEMSA, similar to Walmart, where there's an offshoot. In this case, it's a venture between Coca-Cola and FEMSA. So there's a lot of conglomeration and large, big entities that have joined together to provide this diversity in people's portfolios. There's Bimbo, which is a bread maker, and there's a lot of growth projected in that sector, all the way up to 2030. So if you go into the Mexican ADR index that we've made, we have the top 10, and then we have like a dark horse, so to speak, with Grupo Aeroméxico, which we believe will grow due to the nature of the increasing interdependence between the two economies, and there will always be travel between two neighboring countries that are this big with this amount of economic activity. It's a volume thing, it's a numbers thing. Like there will always be so many people going back and forth for business, for travel, pleasure, family, etc. And I think it's the interdependence between these two economies that makes something like this kind of necessary. And what we do is we average out prices for all of these. And I think at the bottom we have our um, a reference to a price, and you can also grab, or right here at the top, sorry, we have at the top a weighted index. So if you were to take all of these stocks and combine them in terms of price based on their individual activity, you get a delta between their change at closing time with respect to their change or to the price the day before. And so they closed in the red, which is typical because people on Friday sell off. There's a lot of like analysts, people who are traders for institutions who sell on Friday. They're not buying. They're trying to clear profit. And as fiscal years start closing, you'll see a lot of selling off just so that their books look correct, and they're taking profit essentially. Again, not a piece of stock advice in any way, shape, or form, but it is just a way for us to look at the markets and to appreciate real economic activity in sectors that are impactful in different ways, not just necessarily um, in the traditional AI sectors. So we're basically taking a little break